Decipher. During the spring of 2008, many emails circulated around the southern United States about a strange phenomenon known as the 4 o'clock a.m. killer. These emails usually stated made-up incidents about teens getting murdered within 4 a.m. and 4:12 a.m., usually with bad grammar, cheesy stories, and threats stating if you don't resend this to 5 different people, you will die the same way. This was all a load of shit, other than a specific email that was never intended to be a chain email. On April 4, 2008, a man by the name of Thomas Welts received an email from an old friend named Richie Sampson, whom he lost contact with years ago. He was surprised that he even knew his email, as the last time he had saw Richie was at his high school graduation in 1996. After that, Richie was never really heard from at all. Even most people who knew Richie claimed that he was the kind of guy that disappeared from existence every now and then. Now, in high school, Richie was quite the kid. He generally got obsessed with things he couldn't figure out. The strange thing is, most of the time he'd accidentally find out the answer when he'd look back at his previous studies as stated from his diary. He did keep a diary, and in it he wrote down what he knew about whatever it was that he was trying to figure out. And almost always, he'd figure it out from looking at past studies. The reason why this is strange is because it must mean that subliminally he already knew the answer and his brain told him by incorporating it in his writings. Truth is, Richie was fairly messed up. He had social anxiety disorder and rarely was seen conversing with people in high school. He spent his lunches in a cafe down the street from their high school with his diary and notes and just wrote down whatever he could figure out. A murder happened in the area years ago that went unsolved. He eventually found out who did it, how it was committed, and where it was committed. He always said that he was able to figure out the answer by looking at his notes. But when the authorities looked at his notes, they always seemed to find nothing. Because of all his findings, his diary was quite valuable to the law. Murder cases that went unsolved were in fact solved, cases were closed, and justice was served. He even led the cops to a burial ground that contained $10,000 worth of stolen jewelry. It was later returned to the local jewelry shop, and the stolen goods made for a great tourist attraction. The town praised his diary, and it had almost 900 pages of writing. Lying on the last few pages was the last mystery Richie ever solved. It was about the 4 a.m. killer, and Richie tried to come to a conclusion. In his diary it stated he did, but he never wrote down the answer. It simply said, "Perceiving is reality. I cannot go on knowing everything." Linking this to the email he sent Thomas is more difficult. There was almost no record of him existing since 2001, as he never went anywhere or did anything. This made it difficult for Thomas to find him. The body of the email he sent to Thomas at 4:06 a.m. on April 4th simply said, "It's been 8 days since I last saw my family, and I am more than afraid. I don't know what to do, but I'll find out soon, sadly. I last saw that thing. Christ, its eyes looking right at me. I have a feeling I won't be here long. Just you have to help me. Please, I need your help." Not having an idea what it meant, Thomas replied numerous times. Never getting any sort of answer, he became frustrated. Thomas went on a trip to his old hometown in Ponica City, Oklahoma, and visited Richie's old house. After that, Thomas wasn't heard from in 4 days. After his wife began to worry, she decided to go look for him. When she arrived where Thomas said he'd be, at Richie's house, she saw the door wide open. As soon as she walked in, lying on the dinner table was Thomas, with a single but fatal stab wound right in his neck. "Kill" was written numerous times on the wall with his blood, and there was absolutely no sign of struggle. But perhaps the strangest mystery was the fingerprints that were used to write "kill" on the wall were a complete match to Thomas's. To this day, no one knows what that email meant, or why Richie sent it. But when you think about it, Richie was able to figure out things by looking back at what he wrote, right? Perhaps that explains that the spelling errors in his email, eight or ont, eyes, have, and knee, which are missing letters I, M, D, E, A, D. Breathing. Steady hissing sounds filled Michael's room as the soft stream of white paint hit the plastic shell of his newly disassembled computer shell. Ignoring the hissing, one could also pick up the constant, seemingly never-ending, high-pitched squealing of his monolithic and multiple heavy Sony monitors. All of these displayed nothing but static. Gray, fuzzy, pixelated static just fizzed in unison with the spray can he'd been working as though it were a wand. Setting this down next to a Chinese to English dictionary nearby, he stood up and stepped back to admire the fruits of hours of tedious painting and strong chemical odor. Done, he thought triumphantly, grimacing to his now bright white case. It's like I just took it out of the box. Excitedly, Michael trudged to his phone on a desk a few steps away from his finished paint job. It was a beige, 80s-looking office phone connected to a landline he'd forcefully wired through his room. He sat back on his chair and quickly dialed the number scrawled onto the picture of him and a slender-looking, white-haired, glassy-eyed male, with the latter having his arm around Michael as the two smiled warmly. "Ring me up whenever," he read aloud from the scrawling, examining the photo as the dial tone hummed. Once, twice, a third time, a fourth time, 4 more times. Then, "Hey, you've reached Lloyd Aldred. Leave a message before the beep." Beep. "Pick up the damn phone." Michael chuckled into the microphone. "I finished the case. You ought to come check it out, mate." Slam. He trudged back, and just as he sat down, bring. Huh? He got up and slowly walked to the phone, checking the caller ID. Lloyd A. Smirking, he picked up the phone and immediately began bantering. "Well, mate, decided to pick up after all, I see." Silence on the other end. Dead air. Only faint telephone static shouted back quietly at Michael. Mouth slack-jawed and eyebrow raised. "Okay. This isn't funny, dick." He chuckled, voice wavering. "Yancey tried this, but you lot never learn that I don't scare so He suddenly stopped, realizing something. "Mrs. Aldred? I'm so sorry. I'm one of Lloyd's friends. I don't believe we've met before." Still nothing, but Michael slowly began to hear a faint sound. An on and off sound, constant yet ever so changing. In his nervous composure, he'd dumbly forgotten what the word was for this, but he knew it was an obvious word. It was on the tip of his nose. He leaned closer onto the speaker, vainly trying to listen through clenched teeth while a bullet of sweat slid down his brow. Suddenly an ear-piercing screech, pierced the silence as Michael lurched back and the phone dropped out of his hand. "Motherfucker!" he hollered into the line, shouting every curse word in the book before realizing the screaming ended and the line was nothing but static. Just static, yet the faint noise continued. Michael toyed with the idea of calling again before hearing his parents' car pull up to the driveway. A glance of the clock told him he was up over an hour after he promised he'd be asleep. "Oh, balls!" he muttered, shutting but merely his light off and hopped into bed. He awoke to a piercing alarm telling him it was 11 in the morning, only punctuated by the sounds of the TV in the living room. Oozing out of bed, Michael slowly slid his door open and made his way slowly to the living room. The house was stirring with the noise of the fan, and it would have been quieter were it not for the newscasters yammering. "A local has been found in his home dead." Michael walked to the fridge and eyed himself in the mirror, messing with a piece of food in his braces before opening the door. "According to officials, his mother recounted finding her son's..." Michael tuned out the TV, searching for a big yellow carton of Sunny D. "Dreadful news," Michael muttered as he stepped back to the stove. on it being a pan with fried bacon, and next to that being a pair of toasted bread slices. So damn early, too. He grabbed a carton of orange juice, a tray of bacon, and buttered bread in one hand, plopped himself onto the couch, gazing dumbly at the broadcast. Indeed, the maternal figure recounted what she saw that night. It cut to a woman drenched in tears and makeup. He was such a good boy. Wouldn't hurt a fly, and it was, our phone. Something about the woman seemed off to Michael. Leaning forward, he grabbed the DVR remote and paused to gaze. Her hair was silver, almost a beaming white, and even despite her crying, her eyes seemed glassy and almost gleamed in the light of the sun. All of a sudden, Michael heard soft footsteps on the TV's reflection. He saw a figure, and behind him he heard one thing, a faint sound. An on and off sound, constant yet ever so changing. He remembered the word, breathing. My experiences with skinwalkers. I have had run-ins with skinwalkers on 3 separate occasions. Let me tell you, they're not easy to talk about, let alone write about, because just thinking about it gets me scared again. So I will tell you about the first time I ever saw one, which happened to be the first time I even heard of one. First off, a little background about me. I live in Utah, and all of the experiences happened while I was still living at home with my parents. I grew up about an hour outside of Salt Lake City in farming country, so I was raised on a farm. Growing up, I used to go hunting with my dad and brothers 4+ times a year. So between hunting, camping, and growing up on a farm, I know my animals. Now to start the story. It was 7 years ago in late October. I was 18 years old, and my boyfriend, now husband, was 21. For the sake of being private, we will call him Rob. He is half Spanish, half Irish. One thing to note about Rob is he is a pretty big boy, 6 feet tall, 260 pounds, football star. He lived all the way in Salt Lake, but he would still drive up every day after we both got off work to see me. He was a trooper. But one night, he wasn't feeling too good, so we decided to take off a little earlier at 3 a.m. We walked out of my back door to the front of the house where his car was parked. The moment we walked out the back door, the smell consumed us. It smelled like rotten meat. Rob commented that the country air stunk more than usual. I remember thinking that maybe a cow had died earlier in the day and we didn't know. But it smelled like it had been decomposing for weeks. When we got to his car, Rob threw his stuff in quick and got back out to give me one last hug goodbye, when something caught my eye. It looked like a skinny, bony dog that could barely walk. I remember thinking maybe it was a stray and I was going to shoo it away, but the way its body was shaped made me think it was some sort of coyote, so I kept quiet. It was sniffing around in my neighbor's front yard when all of a sudden it stopped dead in its tracks and stared directly at my boyfriend and I. Now this stare made the hair on my neck and arms stick straight up. It was like it wasn't just looking at me, but studying me almost. When all of a sudden, it stood up on 2 legs and hauled ass into the fields behind my neighbor's house. When it stood, it was very tall and gangly, but it stood so smoothly, and when it started to run, you would think it was Usain Bolt. It was so fast, but oddly enough, I never heard its feet hit the ground. I grabbed onto Rob, scared out of my damn mind. I turned to him, but he was still watching it run away in horror. I whispered to him, "What the fuck was that?" His face went pale and he replied to me, "Hurry and get your ass inside your house. Lock your doors, shut your blinds, turn your lights off, and call me." No questions asked. I started to sprint back into the backyard to the door, and when I got inside, I did as he said. I got into my bedroom, which is in the front of the house, top floor. I peeked out my window, and Rob's car was already out of sight, so he must have burned some major rubber to get out of sight so quickly. I have never dialed his number fast enough. He answered asking if everything was okay and making sure I was fine and that I did everything he said. I again asked him what we had just seen. He told me he didn't want me freaking out, but eventually he gave up and explained to me what it was. It was definitely a skinwalker. He continued to tell me that he knew because he had seen one before and was well informed on what they were because his Navajo friend was there the night he saw one for the first time, too. His friend took Rob back to his house, and his grandmother explained to Rob the Navajo stories behind them, what they were, and she also cautioned both of them to not go near them, don't think about them, don't talk about them, etc. Needless to say, we were both scared out of our minds, and we started to hang out in the city in his house, rather than where I lived because it was such a bad experience. 7 years later, we are married now and living in the city. We don't talk about what happened that night unless it has to be talked about, and when we do, we both get pretty frightened. Alright guys, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and share. Give me a roar down in the comments if you want more, and I will see you in my next video.